I give now the floor to Erin Sankan. We have had the opportunity to meet you in Turkey, and I'm really pleased to have you here at the European Parliament. You have the floor as chair of the Association of Bar, Turkish Bar Association.
Türkiye Barolar Birliği adına saygıyla selamlıyorum. Davetiniz için de teşekkür ederim.
On behalf of the Turkish Bar Association, I should like to thank you for your invitation. Thank you to the European Parliament. It's an excellent opportunity to speak to you as the Subcommittee on Human Rights. As you are well aware, there was a terrorist attack on Istanbul and on our country. Our citizens, including children, were killed. There were some 80 injured. Now, frequently, after these attacks, we wonder, what could we possibly do? What can we do in the face of these attacks? It's difficult for us to understand as members of humankind. Now, thank you for your condolences and for your kind remarks. Terrorism will only be brought to an end once we have been able to work all together as an international community to make sure that happens. I would just like to recall at this stage that defending human rights and the rule of law, that is really at the heart of our raison d'etre at the Turkish Bar Association. In 2001, this became the case. As you will recall, in 2001, the country of Turkey was affected by a serious economic crisis. At the time, we saw that the economic crisis brought about a change in the government, and our application to join the EU continued. Then there were socio-economic circumstances that impacted the situation. In 2002, there was a change in government. As you are well aware, the political party in place currently has been there for some 20 years now. And a paradigm shift has taken place in the interim period, I'm sure you are aware. I wanted to make sure that I addressed some of the major dynamics of the country. I won't go into great detail, but I'd like to give you more of a legal analysis than a political analysis. Today, I am here as a legal expert to discuss with you the current state of the judiciary in the country. I'd also like to address some of the issues that we are facing in the Turkish Bar Association. I will have some general comments to make, then I will broach the more detailed aspects. And I'd also like to talk about the role of lawyers in Turkey and the profession there. So let us look first and foremost at rule of law. Now, in a system with a separation of powers, all have the same rights And the rule of law is a concept that requires independent decision-making and impartial decisions to be made. And I would like to state that the Republic of Turkey has a constitutional tradition in place, an ancient one at that, from the outset of the Republic. Meanwhile, when there was a failed coup d'etat, and there was a state of emergency and a state of exception that were established, and the presidential regime changed, the separation of powers no longer was able to intervene, and that obviously changed things. The fact that the executive is now in the hands of one individual, the President of the Republic, that is something that is never before seen, constitutionally speaking, in our country. The fact that the Parliament no longer can fill its role, either because of structural or circumstantial reasons. The executive has no checks on it. And that is something that you can only really understand if you look at the example of Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. Now, this is something that should have gone through the parliament, according to the constitution, and yet the withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention was effectuated by the president in a matter of some 24 hours. Without the judicial having any say in that whatsoever.
Yargısal denetimine tabi kılınan
The High Council of Judges and Prosecutors in its decisions should have been involved independently, impartially, should have been able to act in consequence of this situation. Following the failed coup d'etat, we know that a number of judges and prosecutors were fired. Much younger judges and prosecutors were brought in to replace them. So we see that the source of the problem is a lack of independence of the judicial system. Unfortunately, many public figures are being pursued, harassed, and the public authority is being used, is being instrumentalized, and rather than giving priority to the rule of law, the opposite happens. The law is used, instrumentalized, and that is actually the main threat to respect for human rights. I'd like to ask the chair how much time I have left, because...
Değerli katılımcılar, bir dakika.
Yes, well, in 1 minute, it's going to be rather difficult to sum up the problems my country is facing, and also to deal with solutions to them. So perhaps I'll just wrap up there and offer to answer your questions. I wanted to try and focus on what the origin, the source of our problems is, which is the government, and thank you for having given me that opportunity. I'll now give the floor to Yaman Akdeniz, who is Professor of Law at the Human Rights Law Research Centre, Faculty of Law, and Pro-Rector for the Istanbul Bilgi University. You have the floor for 8 minutes.
Hello. As I am away, I couldn't be there. I'll start with saying I hope you can hear me, and many thanks for the kind invitation. I will be obviously talking very briefly. As my colleague stated, it is not easy to address everything related to Turkey in such a short period of time. So before I address the more recent developments, I need to emphasize the fact that Turkey has been in a sharp democratic backslide within the last 10 years, in particular since the failed coup attempt of July 2016 and during and subsequent to the state of emergency period in Turkey. And while the post-state of emergency rules and regulations were introduced, key recommendations of the Council of Europe and its bodies such as the Venice Commission were largely ignored and, to be honest, yet to be addressed. Therefore, the adverse effects of the 2-year-long state of emergency ruling continued to significantly impact on democracy and fundamental rights. In addition to that, the European Commission, while emphasizing that deterioration of human and fundamental rights continued in Turkey during both in 2020, 2021, and you can see that in 2022 reports on Turkey, stated repeatedly that concerns remain over the systemic lack of independence of the judiciary, which my colleague also addressed. So serious backsliding continued also on freedom of expression since the failed coup attempt of July 2016 in Turkey, and criminal cases and convictions of journalists, human rights defenders, lawyers, writers, and social media users increased substantially since then, with a chilling and silencing effect primarily on opposition voices. Thousands of people have been subject to criminal investigations. Over 75,000 social media accounts were investigated, and legal action was taken against over 32,000 people during 2020. And during 2021, the numbers almost doubled, with over 146,000 social media accounts investigated and legal action taken against over 60,000 people. Within this context, the number of criminal investigations and prosecutions are strikingly high in relation to the crime of insulting the president of Turkey. Next slide, please. You will see now on the screen that over 194,000 criminal investigations were initiated during the President Erdogan's era, and over 44,000 people were prosecuted, and almost 17,000 people were found guilty, and again just over 16,000 persons accepted the suspended pronouncement of the judgment. Basically, they have been found guilty, but they did not face the consequences. Only just over 7,000 people were found not guilty, and almost 5,000 people were imprisoned. Next slide, please. Here you can see the annual breakdown of the statistics involving insulting the president of Turkey, and how many people are being investigated and prosecuted only just for this crime. And next slide, please. We also see the deterioration of internet freedom and how it's in serious decline in Turkey, and especially Law 5651, the notorious internet law, turned into a censorship tool in practice to silence dissenting voices. Let me give you some statistics. It is an aggressive policy to systematically block access to political speech on the internet, over 74,000 websites are currently blocked from Turkey. And in addition to that, over 150,000 URL addresses, so individual news articles or social media content, are also blocked from Turkey. Over 55,000 tweets, over 14,000 YouTube videos are currently from Turkey. And let's not forget the fact that Twitter, YouTube, and Wikipedia platforms have been blocked in the past, and anti-government and especially Kurdish news websites are systematically blocked from Turkey. And currently, both Deutsche Welle and Voice of America websites remain blocked from Turkey. Only 2 days ago, on Saturday, Tumblr social media platform was subject to a blocking order, so Tumblr is currently not available from Turkey. And again, only yesterday, for several hours, we witnessed throttling access to social media platforms subsequent to the bomb attack in Istanbul. This was an arbitrary interference and total blackout for the majority of the public unless they use VPN services. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the yearly statistical numbers in relation to access blocking to websites from Turkey. And 2021, it has increased much more compared to previous years. Next slide, please. I have been asked to comment on the new crime of disinformation. This is the crime of publicly disseminating misleading information to the public. As you can see on your screen, it resembles very much Article 337 of the Hungarian Criminal Code, which criminalizes scaremongering. So Turkey basically translated a provision from Hungary and criminalizes who publicly disseminates false information regarding the internal and external security, public order and general health of the country, with the sole motive of creating anxiety, fear or panic among the public in a way that is suitable for disturbing the public peace. And if you do that, if you manage to do that, you will be imprisoned from 1 year to 3 years imprisonment. And basically, this is the criminalizing the dissemination of misleading information to the public is extremely problematic, especially during a period leading into the general elections in Turkey. And this offense lacks obviously adequate and effective legal standards and definitions and provides a broad and uncircumscribed discretion to the authorities in Turkey. It certainly falls short of the European Convention's quality of law requirements, with a clear risk of arbitrariness in terms of its potential widespread use before the general elections of 2023. And let's see who was the first person to be subjected to criminal investigation. Next slide, please. And that's Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition leader. He became the first person facing disinformation charges under the new law. Next slide, please. And he's facing currently this criminal investigation for spreading disinformation in relation to the country's use of drugs problems and in relation to what he called black money entering the country. And who reported him to the authorities? It was basically the police. The General Directorate of Security filed a complaint against Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. So I will briefly tell you that in addition to the introduction of the crime of disinformation, during October 2020, the government also amended the internet law, and currently the social media providers have new obligations, and which has been substantially expanded. And if they do not basically do whatever the Turkish authorities tell them to do, they will be facing new penalties, including throttling the internet traffic bandwidth reduction, and also some other serious crimes. And failure to comply may also result with the issuing of an administrative fine by the president of the telecom authority, up to 3% of the social media providers' global revenue in the preceding calendar year.
May I ask you to conclude?
Yes, of course. Finally, the last slide. Turkey is also now attempting to regulate the over-the-top services such as WhatsApp, Skype, Signal, and they're also required to form legal representation in Turkey. And in the case of non-compliance, they will face serious sanctions, including throttling and or access blocking to their services from Turkey sometime in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor now to the members. So Isabelle Wissler for EPP.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say that we empathise with the families of the victims of the attack in Turkey. That's the first thing that comes to mind right now. Then on what our speakers have said, I think it's very, very clear that what we've believed is happening certainly is happening. A judicial system that no longer works independently, instrumentalisation of the judicial system by the state, democratic backsliding, and backsliding on fundamental rights, backsliding on a number of issues, withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention, which is a major problem for us. Oh, I think I've run out of time, but I did want to ask, what do you think we can do to support civil society in its desire for democracy? Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. I'll give the floor to Andrea Cozzolino on behalf of Nacho, who had to leave us.
Sì, a nome anche di Nacho.
On behalf of Nacho and myself, I would like to send our condolences for the attack and the terrible images that we've all seen here in Europe, of course. Now, we've been given a lot of figures and a lot of input and information. And it is very concerning, of course, what's happening to democracy in Turkey. So the question that is obvious is, how can the European Parliament intervene in addition to what is already being done from here until the elections, so that we make sure that there isn't further backsliding in democracy in the country?
Je me joins naturellement.
Of course. I'd like to also express my sympathy for the victims of the attack. And I'd also like to draw attention to the fact that the elections will be taking place in July. It's been said a lot that they might be brought forward in Ankara and elsewhere. And people say that the president might feed into tensions or increase tensions to strengthen his position in the elections. So with the Kurds, with Greece on one or other island, and to try to hype up economic tensions in order and to then dole out social and economic benefits just before the elections, which will obviously have a significant impact, given that we're talking about inflation of 80% officially, some even say 100% unofficially. And given all of that, we risk facing a situation in Turkey where freedoms would be even more undermined, if that's possible, than they are today. The Chair. Thank you for that rather pessimistic view, although perhaps that is the case. Tina.
Both of the speakers, and it's really difficult to be optimistic, I must say. I mean, it's still deteriorating, the situation, and I think that we may also fear of not being able anymore to reach out to the citizens, and also for the citizens to get the right information that they need in order to stay well informed and to make up their minds about what's happening. So that would be one of my questions also. you know, how will citizens and politicians in the EU still receive reporting and information in mid to long term? And how could we support civil society, journalists, etc., more in order to overcome or to at least compensate a little bit the increasing oppression on them? Also, if it comes to social media, what we also heard, there's a lot of oppression on the big companies on social media. They are also obliged to report, to share information about their users with the governments. Could you explain more? Do you think that they would be open, or if there's a possibility for the EU or the European Parliament to try to seduce them, you know, not to cooperate in this to such a large extent with the Turkish government? So how could we prevent those companies from doing so, from becoming an instrument for the government? And my last question is also regarding the regretful, the awful terrorist attack that we saw yesterday. What do you expect, what impact that will have on the fundamental rights and the freedoms in Turkey, and also on the position of HDZ, which is still in a very fragile position? Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke. Sorry for Kathleen. Kathleen, as you are not in the room, I forgot to give you the floor. So, Kathleen, you have the floor. Kathleen Che.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I really hope this connection stays stable. I do apologize for not being there, and also I would like to send my most sincere condolences to the Turkish nation after the terrible terrorist attack that happened very recently, and I am very sorry that we are also speaking here about the democratic backsliding in your country, which is absolutely regrettable. We are watching with very, very big worries here from here, the European Parliament, the deterioration of the rule of law and the backsliding under the Erdogan government. And this leads me to one of my questions. It is very obvious that the EU's toolbox to defend the rule of law in third country is incomplete at best and inefficient at worst. So I wanted to ask you, how do you evaluate what we have already done, the effort of the EU to counter the democratic backsliding in Turkey, and also to what measures do you expect on our part to ensure that democratic standards and human rights are better upheld in Turkey? And also as a Hungarian, I was very disturbed to see that our legal framework was partially adopted in your country. This law that Erdogan just copied gave way to before unexpected breaches in Hungary, where opposition activists were imprisoned and taken into police custody just because they criticized the government on Facebook. So I'm very disturbed that as a European member state, this is the example we are setting for other countries. But this is also something that we have to deal with as Hungarian opposition as well. So thank you very much for your bravery, and I am very much curious to listen to your evaluation of our toolbox. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. Ana Miranda.
Madame la Présidente, je voulais surtout...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to encourage the lawyers in Turkey, because we were at the trial of Kobani in Ankara, and we saw that the danger to lawyers is that we may be talking about losing one's whole career because of defending a case. So we want to express our support for them. Now, we in Parliament have condemned the arbitrary actions of the Turkish government, but there is some hypocrisy, I think, coming from the Commission, because it's at a time when HDP, one of the parties, is being condemned. That's the time when you have to say, stop, this is enough. This is the time when political parties are being attacked, that's when we have to draw a line. So that's why we wanted to express all of our solidarity to lawyers and for their defence of citizens. Thank you.
I don't know if Sergei, you want to add something? No? You have the floor. Mr. Shatkan.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum sorular ve değerli.
Thank you very much for those questions and your questions and for your condolences. I will try and answer the whole range of questions that was put to me. Freedom of expression, or the ending of freedom of expression, was the start of things. In the legal world, things are unpredictable. We're actually talking, in fact, about censorship in a way, but self-censorship, in fact. That's what's happening here. And what is being created is a climate of fear, which has been created just before elections are about to take place, of course. And we have a law which is completely unconstitutional, and the Constitutional Court ought to act. We have the European Court of Human Rights situation. You're aware of that. On the European Parliament, you and what you can do to support democratic standards. You talked about polarization in politics, and it is a little bit difficult, obviously, when we come to Europe and express our views. We are accused, we are stigmatized, we are told we are complaining about our country abroad. On the European Court of Human Rights, the court and these kinds of bodies exist to defend the rights of citizens against governments, states which are violating the rules. How can international stakeholders act to improve the situation in our country when what the European Court of Human Rights says isn't even respected? I can't... in Mr. Cavala's case, for example, there's very little that we can do. We can't even express our views on social media platforms, because under this new law, under this new law, social media would no longer exist, in fact. So that's a very important point. We do have a project where we're cooperating with the UN on access to justice for migrants who are vulnerable, and that's a very useful project. I think we should try to get involved in more projects of those kinds to ensure that independent bodies can strengthen the right to a defence. The European bar associations have been working on these kinds of projects. That's something we can carry on doing. I was asked a question too about Kurdistan. Actually, one cannot use the word Kurdistan when we're talking about Turkey. Perhaps I misunderstood the words that were used there. I'll give the floor to Yaman Akdeniz.
Yaman, pardon.
Sorry, could you please press on the speak button at the bottom of your page?
Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you for that. First of all, do not give up on Turkey yet. So dialogue is still important, I believe, with the Turkish authorities. But I think you need to do more than being deeply regretted about certain things happening in Turkey, politically or otherwise. And secondly, I believe you should remind more often that politicians like Selahattin Demirtas, a business person, Osman Kavala, are still in detention, and they have been in detention for a very long time. And let's not forget about the fact that now the president of the Turkish Medical Association, Şebnem Korur Fincancı, she's in detention for expressing her views on a TV program. So this is, everyone is in danger when you speak against the authorities in Turkey, and that should be reminded more often. Thirdly and finally, yes, it's not certain that the social media platforms like Twitter or Meta or YouTube will basically obey what the Turkish authorities want them to do. They have a 6-month period in which they need to decide whether to stay in Turkey and basically accept everything the Turkish authorities tell them to in a way become the long arm of the Turkish law enforcement agencies and become complicit in human rights violations in Turkey. That's something they need to consider seriously. And I know, as a matter of fact, that they are very much concerned about being in Turkey under the current conditions. So it would be useful for the European Parliament to exchange views with the representatives of the social media platforms in Brussels. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you all.
Merci.
Thank you very much.